So you want to improve learner outcomes. Here's the only thing you need to do: co-teach. That's a pretty bold claim, right? And so you might say, learners that are young, learners that are old, learners in between. And the answer would be yes, whether you're teaching early childhood or if you're like us and you're teaching adults. One of the top strategies to improve learning outcomes for learners is to co-teach. Well, there's three main reasons. What do I mean by co-teach? So the first reason that the research shows us that co-teaching leads to improved outcomes, imagine that, is because we're talking about the size of the group and the configuration of the group. So we know that relationships are an active ingredient, and being able to meet the needs, neurologically speaking, academically, socially, emotionally, all of the ways, it's easier to do that one brain to another brain. Now, that doesn't mean we need to do one-on-one, but it means that we're social creatures and we need someone to attend to our inner and outer world. And it's just easier for educators, related service folks, to be able to do that in smaller groups. The kicker is we don't want to just get smaller groups for the sake of size. We want to make sure they're also heterogeneous. So when we think about co-teaching, we can really start to sort and separate based on other things than ability. So we don't want to be doing ability grouping, but we still want to meet the individual needs of the students, and we want to be able to have those strong relationships. So that's the first evidence-based reason we co-teach, is because we can deal with the grouping. Either think of it in terms of ratios and or size, but really think about it: am I able to address the needs neurologically, socially, emotionally, communicative, academically of the students, or the adult for that matter? The second reason that we say co-teaching will improve learner outcomes is because we think about is differentiation, or provision of access points. So it's much easier to provide 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 access points when you have 2 or more adults doing that. So when Julie and I co-teach, we're able to say something and show something. I don't have to do that all by myself or with a puppet, right? I can say something and Julie will type it in the chat, or she'll draw it on a smartboard. So just that simple interaction of me talking and her writing or drawing or typing is adding another access point. We call it one teach, one make multisensory. And it's super easy to do when you have 2 or more humans trying to remove barriers and to increase access points. So number 3, which is sort of related to number 1 and 2, when we have a co-teaching opportunity, we increase engagement and fun. So you might think, fun? This is learning. We got to meet standards and all these things. Well, the way that humans learn, partially by being social, partially by having our needs met socially, neurologically, communicatively again. But we also, when we have fun. So we often say that neurons that wire together, fire together. And what that means is when something makes sense, when something clicks, when it's my interest, when I'm motivated, when it's something that has meaning to me, it will stick. Now, sometimes that meaning can be an emotion or a feeling. And sometimes that can be the downside, like if something's super challenging or if something makes me feel embarrassed. I might remember that, but it's really not creating neural pathways of learning. It's creating, remember, avoid that at all costs. So we're really talking about neurons firing and wiring together in positive and productive ways, ways that help us with recall and comprehension, ways that help us problem solve, ways that help us just even maneuver through an activity socially. Sometimes that's the hardest part of an activity or a lesson, is the social interactions. So we want to think about, how can I increase engagement? How can I increase the novelty and the fun? Not only for myself, because remember, I have those mirror neurons. If I'm having fun, it's a little bit contagious. It's like a yawn. And so if you yawn, somebody else yawns. Well, if I'm having fun, other people are like, that looks like fun. If I'm like, wah, wah, this is so boring, this is such a drag, guess what? Other brains are going to go, this is boring and this is a drag. And then you go, well, some people think it's boring and some people think it's exciting. How do I meet both of those needs? Once again, we're back to co-teaching, and it's easier if you have 2 or more adults that can think about, how do I increase engagement, novelty, and fun? And that often comes through our relationships, That's back to our first reason. That often comes through access points. That's our second reason. So when you put all three things together, when we think about the grouping and our relationships and heterogeneous grouping, when we think about this removal of barriers and increasing access points, and when we think about increasing novelty and fun, those three things create a formula for success, that we have more effective teaching and better learner outcomes, whether those, again, are learners that are 3 or those learners are 53. If you want to see a change in behavior, in knowledge, in skills, in function, we really need to think about how do we co-teach. And you might say, well, it's just not possible in my district or my program. Well, think about it this way. We don't mean all day, every day. It can be for 50 seconds. And those 50 seconds are increasing learning outcomes. But you want to think about, how can we brainstorm how I can heterogeneously group my students and reduce stressors and be a neurological safe zone for them. If those other adults are pulling one kid out, over, or aside, that's not really co-teaching or co-serving. That's not helping us think about ratios or heterogeneous grouping. Maybe they take all the kids with social emotional IEP goals and go do a small group activity. Sure, it's a smaller group, but they're all kids that struggle with social emotional. So how do we make a heterogeneous group? And what do we do when we miss the information, why I'm being pulled out or pulled over or pulled aside? We really want to get creative in thinking about how do we use those other adults. That could be our paraprofessionals and teaching assistants, volunteers. We really want to think broadly. And if we're, channeling Maria Montessori, we're thinking the environment is the third teacher. First of all, co-teaching means more than one adult. Okay, but we're not worried about their titles. We're not worried about the length of time. We're not worried about their roles and responsibilities. We're here to work together to do those three things. And so you really want to think more broadly about what you mean by co-teaching, how often co-teaching can occur, and then you will see improved outcomes.